Hello and welcome to our Christ Baptist Church devotionals. We're going through the book of Ezra. Here we've gone through the first 8 chapters of Ezra. And as well, we've gone through during this period of about the last 2-3 months, we've gone through the books of Daniel, the books of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Jonah, and Esther. And really what we're doing now is we're tying in these last books, Daniel, Esther, and now Ezra, about the timeline of what happened to Israel after they got taken captive by Babylon and then went back and eventually made it back to Jerusalem and made all the way back to Malachi, getting ready for the New Testament. And get our timelines right, and there's some very practical lessons of teaching about how to live right now in the church, even now just through the book of Ezra, as we've seen in the first 8 chapters. And so now we're in chapter 9 of the book of Ezra, and so far what we've seen is the first 6 chapters deal with what happened right after Cyrus's first year when they were told to go back, 538 BC, and the fact that they went back, but there was difficulty and they were stopped several times from building the temple, but the preaching of Haggai and Zechariah motivated them to go and kept going, and they pushed through and they completed the temple about 520 BC under a king named Darius. Well, we've seen now in chapter 7, we pick up at 457 BC, some almost 50, 60 years later, well, actually some 80 years later from when they had first got that temple. And so Ezra has led a group of people now to Jerusalem to get them resettled, reestablished, and moving. So now we're into chapter 9, and then we go to chapter 10, we're finished, then we go into the book of Nehemiah. So that's what's happened so far under the book of Ezra. The first 6 chapters just gave us a bit of a history of the difficulties that Israel has faced, the opposition. Certainly their neighbors did not want them to establish Jerusalem, did not want them to establish worship. They worshipped the Canaanite idols and their deities. They actually practiced the horrible ritual of burning their children in the fire. And so they're trying to establish now, again, Israel as a nation worshiping God against much opposition. So Ezra's led them there in chapter 7 and 8. And so now we're in that time beginning in chapter 9. Let's pick up and see what we learn here from the book of Ezra. Now when these things had been completed, the princes approached me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands, according to their abominations, those of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they've taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race is intermingled with the peoples of the lands. Indeed, the hands of the princes and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness. When I heard about this matter, I tore my garment and my robe, and pulled some of the hair from my head and my beard, and sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel on account of the unfaithfulness of the exiles gathered to me, and I sat appalled until the evening offering. Let's stop there for a moment. Wow, Ezra is just shocked. He's shocked. He says, now when these things had been completed, that just tells us sometime after that. We don't know when. But we do know this. It's 457 BC. And Nehemiah chapter 1 comes on the scene at 444 BC, so there's 13-year interval between it when Ezra had showed up and when now we're in Nehemiah, where Nehemiah and Ezra were together. This is a time when it's just Ezra. So somewhere in this 13-year interval, somewhere in here, I doubt it was like right after 457, but somewhere, some time frame here, we see that there's a problem. And it's specifically highlighted here in the book for us. Some people approached Ezra, said the princes, so that the high-ranking people there approached him and said, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites. So it's not just the people. It's the people leading worship. They've not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands, according to their abominations. And they listed all these people there. And not only that, they've taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race is intermingled with the peoples of the lands. Indeed, the hands of the peoples and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness. Now, what is going on here? Is this a racial issue? Is this God and Israel saying we will not mix our pure blood because we're superior? No, that's not the issue. That really isn't the issue. Yes, they're concerned the fact that they're mixing with the peoples of the lands. But that's not the reason why God said this. What's happening here is Ezra heard about this one particular sin. This one particular sin. When Ezra heard, he tore my garment, my robe, pulled the hair from his head. Now that's got to hurt. He literally took the hair and pulled it off of his head. And he sat appalled, and everybody looked at him, trembling at the word of God. And they're all sitting appalled. What are they concerned about? Well, they're concerned God just put us in Babylon for disobeying his word. And for doing it without even thinking about it, without even any part of concern on their part. And God put them in slavery in Babylon, slavery under Persia. They've had a really hard time. Now they're just coming back. And the people are not remembering at all. And they're going right back into the same sin. Now here's what the issue is. Let me show you some scripture. A simple one is just Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3. We can see this. He explains it in Exodus and other places, but Deuteronomy 7, even just starting in verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them before you and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. You're to kill them all. And when the Lord your God delivers you before them and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. Okay, so we do that. And furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. Why? Is this some kind of a racial issue? No. Verse 4, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods, and the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. God is saying, I know how these people are. I've been watching them. For 400 years I watched them while Israel was in Egypt. These are people who sacrifice their children to idols of wood and stone. These are nations who were bred from the very beginning from rebellion. And when you come into the land, you're going to mix with them because you want to be like them. You want to take them, and you want to go ahead and you want to intermix, and you want to have basically what's called pluralism, which is a little bit of yours, a little bit of ours. This is going to be great. He says, you cannot. Now, to show you and explain to you why this is not a racial thing at all, it deals with some people specifically called the Moabites. And we know that they're there. We see them there in chapter 9, verse 1. The Moabites were some of these. And very clearly the Moabites stand as one of the peoples that go against God. And do you know that they're related actually to Abraham? The Moabites, they weren't Canaanites. They actually came from Abraham's line, but not directly through Abraham, but through Lot. And Lot was Abraham's nephew. And Moab and the Moabites and the Ammonites came through that line and basically came through rebellion. And they were created, the first person, Moab, and his brother Ammon, they were formed out of incest, just a plot that the daughters had made to try to carry on their line. And so it's always been against Israel from day one. And what we've seen as well, I'm going to just take you to an account. Numbers chapter 25 actually has a very sober account of what happened about the Moabites and Israel in particular. Now, in Numbers chapter 25, there was a prophet, a false prophet named Balaam, the one who rode the donkey, and the donkey talked back to him, and that story is in chapter 24. And so we see chapter 25 when basically Balaam could not get God to curse Israel because they were his people. He said, I know how we're going to get God to curse them. He told the king of Moab, just put your nation right up next to Israel, and everybody's going to start having parties, and they're going to start getting together, and their sons and daughters are all going to intermarry, and then God will do the rest, and he will curse them. So this is what they did. Numbers 25, while Israel remained at a place called Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab. See, they came in to go across and go get these fine-looking women in Moab. For they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So that's exactly what happened, what God said you don't do. As soon as they mix, the in-laws get together and you got to make compromises. The in-laws make compromises, a little bit of ours, a little bit of yours. We visit this family, then we visit that family, and then pretty soon you're not worshiping Yahweh anymore. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. Well, Numbers 25 verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So God said, you better take care of this right away. And Moses said, we got to start killing all the people. He didn't even say judging the people. He said execute. This is Moses, a man who was more humble than any man on earth. I mean, he saw the danger here. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor. Spare no expense. You get your sword and you just start. You need to start. You need to get in right here. We need to start. It's the death penalty. And it was so bad right here. In verse 6, behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman, that would be a Moabite, in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. So all these people are crying. There's literally hundreds of thousands of Israel out there not understanding, and there's this big problem, and people are starting to be judged, and Moses has his guys out there killing people who are with Moabite women and Moabite men or with Israelite women, and you got to kill them all. And there was somebody who was just so bold, he took a Moabite woman, ran in the sight of Moses and all the people, and went into a tent with her. Like, you can't stop me. I'm going to go right there in the tent right here with this woman. And so a man named Phinehas, verse 7 tells us, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, which is why when we talk about Levites, it's real important in the Bible when someone says he's a son of Phinehas, because that's of the line of the Levites who stood with God. They didn't deviate. They didn't go after other gods like Baal and all that. Phinehas were the guys who said, I stand with the Lord, and his holiness is zeal for the Lord. And so when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation, took a spear in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced both of them through. I mean, he just took right down, and both of them were on the ground, and he just stuck a spear and went right through both of them into the ground. And the man of Israel and the woman threw the body, so the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. Now, all of that sounds horrific, and it sounds like these people overreacted. It sounds like, oh my, I can't believe that Moses just did this. But then we see verse 9. Those who died by the plague were 24,000 on the spot. Moses saved the day. In a matter of minutes and hours, 24,000 people died just because they had intermixed Israel and Moab. And God was going to kill them all. But Moses stopped the bleeding. He went in and he just carved out all of that was happening, And Phineas saw somebody came in and just was going right in front of Moses' face, and he went in and speared these people through. And the Lord was so moved by this, in verse 10, that the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phineas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not destroy the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. And it should be for him and his descendants after him a covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. God made a point of singling out Phineas to say, there's something special about this man. And I make a covenant with him. With him, not with Israel, with him. And all of his line, his people will not fail to be priests before him. I'm just going to give you a little something for those of you Bible enthusiasts who like end times. If you go to Ezekiel chapter 44, toward the end, you'll find God describing how the new temple is going to happen, and the new temple with new worship and that. And he talks about the Levites who will minister before him, but he says, but because they went astray, because they completely did go astray on me, they will not minister in the Holy of Holies to me. They will be outside, and I will not let them come near to me. But the sons of Zadok, who happen to be from the line of Phineas, those people will minister to me because they were faithful. That's the line and the covenant promise made to Phineas right here in Numbers 25. God was going to kill all of them. He killed 24,000 as the clock was ticking. And Moses eradicated this plague. Now, why would God be so intent on something that seems like just a social sin? Why would he be so intent on that? Well, because the Moabites, they were the ones who got Israel to come in and to take their children and burn them in the fire. They're the ones who created all this nonsense, this worship that got Israel to go thrown into Babylon. They're the ones who said, don't depend on God. We've got all our fertility gods. These are the Moabites. So you can say, well, man, God really has it in for these idolaters. I thought God was a God of grace. God was a God of mercy. Oh, he is. But he's a God of wrath that says, you will not defile my worship. You will not defile my covenant. And so he did this. You say, wow, okay, so that means we can't ever deal with Moabites. Well, let me show you how God is a God of grace. Just turn to the book of Ruth. And you see a lady named Ruth who ends up marrying in what's called a levirate marriage to a man named Boaz. And their child was in the line that created David, that created the Messiah. Ruth. Well, what's so special about Ruth? She's a Moabite. Ruth is a Moabite. And God not only accepted her, but brought her in to say, you will be in the line of the great-great-grandmother of David, ultimately of Jesus. What made Ruth be able to do this? Ruth said, when she was in Moab with her mother-in-law, Naomi, she says, I'm going to go with you to Israel. See, Naomi had gone to Moab because her husband took her there and they were there and staying there. But now she's going to go back to Israel, and Ruth said, I'm going to go with you. And Ruth would not let go until Naomi said, okay. And Ruth said, my people are your people, and my gods are your gods. Meaning, I give up everything about my Moab culture, and I'm with you and your culture. And God says, welcome. You come on in. You come on in. See, it's not a racial thing at all. It's not a racial thing. It's what you believe and what you're holding on to. You don't intermix, you don't intermarry with different beliefs. It is not only dangerous, it's actually poking God in the eye, saying, who you are doesn't matter. And there's an important lesson here as parents are raising children, and we talk about this and say, what is important? You cannot say, oh, but it's just their decision. It is, but what is your approval? What is your counsel? And we must really understand the importance. When we create unions, we do this in a common faith. In a common faith. That's why Paul makes it very, very clear. You can only marry people in the Lord as Christians. To do so otherwise is blatantly committing this sin and saying it's not a big deal. Well, back to Ezra, we've kind of learned and understood, why Ezra was so upset. Ezra is a man who studied the law so he could practice it and he could teach it. Well, Ezra understood the law. He understood the law a lot. And he understood Numbers 25, and he understood Balaam, and he understood what's called the sin of Peor. He was appalled. He was pulling his hair out because he understood God killed 24,000 people. Can you imagine killing 24,000 people per hour on the hour? That's what was going on. So Ezra in verse 5 says, "But at the evening offering I rose from my humiliation, even with my garment and my robe torn, and I fell on my knees and stretched out my hands to the Lord my God. And I said, Oh my God, I am ashamed and embarrassed to lift up my face to you, my God, for our iniquities." Do you see that? He says our iniquities. He includes himself in there. He doesn't see that he's above these people at all. Our iniquities have risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens. Since the days of our fathers, to this day we have been in great guilt. And on account of our iniquities, we, our kings and our priests, have been given into the hand of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, and to plunder, and to open shame as it is to this day. He's just explaining history. He says, God, you know the history. But now, for a brief moment, grace has been shown from the Lord our God to leave us an escaped remnant and to give us a peg in his holy place, like a peg where you'd hang coats. He gave us a space where we could be there, that our God may enlighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our bondage. We know who we are, for we're slaves. Yet in our bondage our God has not forsaken us, but has extended loving kindness to us in the sight of the kings of Persia, to give us reviving, to raise up the house of our God, to restore its ruins, and to give us a wall in Judah and Jerusalem. Now, understand, Ezra had gone through and understood the history of Esther in Xerxes 1 about 20 years earlier. He understood that dilemma. Why? Well, because they're celebrating the Feast of Purim. Purim was established in 480 BC. It's now around 450 to 457. It's been 20, 30 years. They've been doing Feast of Purim every year. Why? Well, because of wicked Haman almost killed all the Jews, all of Persia. Ezra understood God's grace to what Esther did. She had to go to the king. I mean, she was a slave, and so she had to go in, but she held to Mordecai and held to God's teaching, and it influenced the king. You see, they had grace from God. Ezra understood God's grace. They're on limited time. You don't presume on God's grace. You don't just say, well, he gave us that. We got away with that. Now let's go back, and I guess there's no harm. We can just go back to these Moabite women. It's no big deal. Ezra's saying, you don't understand. I've experienced grace because I've experienced the weightiness of God's discipline, God's judgment. I understand how he is on this sin. He can actually see that sins that are not dealt with have huge implications for the future, especially for his people. Huge implications. And we don't understand the seriousness of sin. And so he is really feeling that and seeing that. He had to. He understood Esther, understood that story, understood they're celebrating the Feast of Purim every year. And he sees Israel doing this, and he's just pulling his hair out. So he says in verse 10, Now our God, what shall we say after this? For you've forsaken your commandments, which you've commanded by your servants the prophets, saying, The land which you are entering into possesses unclean land with the uncleanness of the peoples of the lands, with their abominations which have filled it from end to end with their impurity. So now do not give your sons to your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters to your sons, and never seek their peace or their prosperity, that you may be strong and eat the good things of the land, and leave it as an inheritance to your sons forever, because this is our land. God gave it to us. Do not compromise. What he speaks against here is pluralism. He speaks against the idea of saying, let's join churches together. Let's join our assemblies together, and you do things a bit differently than we do. Doctrine's different, and so forth. But that's okay. This speaks of like when you say, let's have a national day of prayer. That's fine, but with who? With Moabites? We can't have a national day of prayer with Moabites. How do you have a national day of prayer with people who don't believe in a Trinitarian God? They don't believe Jesus is the only way to salvation. They don't believe that Jesus died to save us from not just the effect of our sins and the power of our sins. Not just the penalty. Not just going to hell, but he saved us to be new people. He didn't save us to be having prosperity and free from sickness and all that. How can I have a national day of prayer with all these people that we don't believe the same thing, the same God? Don't unite. He's saying we're not made to unite with those who don't agree with the living God. He says, take your blessings now. Verse 13, after all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and our great guilt, since you, our God, have requited us less than our iniquities deserve and have given us an escape remnant, he's saying, you've been so good to us. How can we do this to you? Shall we again break your commandment and intermarry with the peoples and commit these abominations? Would you not be angry with us to the point of destruction until there is no remnant or any who escape? He is pleading. He is pleading here. Why? Because he sees the seriousness of sin, and he's just begging God to not act now. Give us more patience as we grow out of this, and we will confess this sin and we will turn from this sin. He says, verse 15, O Lord God of Israel, you are righteous, for we've been left an escaped remnant as it is this day. Behold, we are before you in our guilt, and no one can stand before you because of this. That is confession, to say, you're right, I'm 100% guilty, there is no but. Because we need to get this dealt with. He's acting like Phineas. Zeal for the Lord, the plague is coming, 24,000 people died already, and he just drove a spear into this man and woman to stop God's wrath because he saw what was doing. If Moses and the people did not act, that means they're agreeing with the sin. When we do not stop open sin, this is very difficult for parents as children, they grow older, we don't speak against open sin, then you're siding with that as opposed to siding with God, at least being a voice. You might not be able to stop it, but you can be a voice. You can be a voice to say, I stand with God. I might still love you. I mean, your family, you're my friend. Relationally, I'm still with you, but I cannot agree and I cannot give you my blessing and I don't stand with you and I won't support you in it because I stand with God. This is where we as Christians are really going to be called to account, is when we live our theology, when we're out relationally with people and our families. And we say, how do we keep those relationships yet still have people understand how we deal with the holiness of God and his view of sin, and we don't presume on grace, but we beg for grace. We need grace. He is a God of grace. But we understand we do not throw sin in his face. This is a challenge. It's a big challenge for us, and it begins with having God's view of sin. Whatever his view of sin is, that's our view of sin. Otherwise, we will leave sin unchecked, and what happens is sin always has major consequences. Major consequences. So that's what we see in Ezra chapter 9. He got things established. They got a temple going. Everything was great. And then this happened right here. And you see Ezra just reacting the same way Phineas did on that very same sin. So that's what we see in Ezra chapter 9. And we'll wrap up the book as we get tomorrow to Ezra chapter 10. Thank you.